Well, hello to everyone. I hope you can hear me, and welcome. And as you all know, it's the second leg or segment of the Citizen Assembly. But in welcoming you, I first of all want to do as we normally do, make an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge and pay respect to the First Nations on whose traditional land we meet today. I acknowledge them as the custodians of the earth and of all things that grow and breed in the soil. We thank them for passing their wisdom and heritage to all of us since the dream time. We acknowledge the wrongs done to them by newcomers to this land, and we seek to be partners with them in righting these wrongs and in living together in peace and harmony with them and with the land, our common home. We look forward to the day when Australia will listen carefully to their voices, respect their wisdom, formally recognise the sovereignty they have never ceded, and extend to them the justice so long overdue. Well, as I was saying, this is the second leg of our humble pilot project by way of a community gathering, a citizen assembly. The issue we have pinpointed was the one of nuclear power and the proposal to establish a nuclear power industry in this country. But this we saw as just one way of introducing a larger set of questions. Which of course have to do with the energy policies for Australia's future, the question of climate change and implications of that, and the larger question underneath it all, how to advance the cause of democratic participation, democratic deliberation, democratic decision-making. We'll talk more about that in a moment. During the first leg of the Citizen Assembly, we had a number of small groups engaging around some of these questions. We'll do a little more of this evening, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. But we're first going to hear from two of our guests, speakers who were invited, may I say, at relatively short notice, and we're very grateful to them both for agreeing to make a presentation from their particular perspective about things nuclear and implications for energy, environment, and whatever they may wish to cover. We will then, after that, have two things in the main: conversation in small groups around specific questions, and a number of polls, that is to say, questions put to you. We will try and get your answers and then show the results of those answers, hopefully posted on the screens soon after. We'll see how we go. But let me first, as I was saying, introduce our first speaker. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. John Harries. He has a wide knowledge of nuclear issues gained in a 33-year career at the Australian Atomic Energy Commission and its successor, the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation. He has worked on the physics of nuclear reactors, radioactive waste management, the environmental effects of mining, environmental management, and nuclear policy. John is a past president and currently is the secretary of the Australian Nuclear Association and has been the principal author of the association's submissions on nuclear energy. He's keen for Australia to participate in and benefit from worldwide developments in nuclear energy. It's my great pleasure to introduce John Harries. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Joseph?
I can hear you well.
I'll try and share my screen if I can do that. So I can't find a share button around here somewhere.
Just in the banner at the bottom of the screen, you might see participants and chat. And then next,
in chat.
yeah, do you see that? And then there's react and share is in the middle in green.
Share. There we go.
Yeah, great.
And is that share or?
We can now
Perfect.
see your screen.
Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, it's perfect.
All right. So what I'm talking, I guess I've got a background in nuclear issues, so there's going to be a very brief run through the whole thing. To me, nuclear energy is a well-established, proven, and mature technology. It's large scale, zero carbon emissions. It uses relatively small areas of land. It's dependable with high availability, dispatchable 24/7, avoids the air pollution associated with fossil fuels, and globally it's a major source of clean, reliable electricity. Australia can benefit from this overseas experience. We're coming into it relatively late. We almost had some nuclear power in Australia, 70 years ago, perhaps. And now we're looking at it again. So we can now benefit from the overseas experience on regulation, siting, construction, operation, and waste management. All right? Nuclear with renewables can reduce carbon emissions, and it's widely used around the world. If I go to the next slide, just as shows how widely it's used, there's 440 power reactors in 32 countries. In the past 5 years, there have been 26 new build nuclear reactors connected to the grid. These are large reactors. There's 66 power reactors currently under construction around the world, and there's 85 power reactors on order or planned. So this is in lots of countries. The countries building reactors at the moment is 15 countries where reactors are under construction. So it's a standard technology which is available. The first power reactors were operated in the 1950s. There's over 20,000 power reactor years of experience. Worldwide, nuclear energy provided 9% of the world electricity in 2023, it might be, and 17 OECD countries use nuclear. We just look at, I'll skip through something here, page up. This shows just some of the pictures of some of the nuclear power plants around the world. Darlington in Canada. Canada has CANDU reactors. They're a heavy water reactor, and this is on the lake near Toronto, taking lake water for cooling. A reactor in Czech Republic, which is a pressure water reactor, using cooling towers, steam cooling towers. One in South Africa, which is a pressurized water reactor again. It's using the ocean water as cooling, and the reactor in Belgium, which is using both river and cooling towers. So these are just sort of some reactors, just to give you a bit of a sample. It's a standard technology used around the world. I go down to nuclear in Australia, but we do have a nuclear industry in Australia. We have the Opal Multi-Purpose Research Reactor at Anstow in the suburbs of Sydney. This reactor has been operating for almost 20 years, but the reactor at that site since the 1950s, a high-fast reactor, and this reactor has been operating and produces medical isotopes, neutrons for research, and radiation for other things. We have a nuclear regulator, APANSA. We have the Nuclear Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office, the ASNO, which regulates the nuclear materials. We have uranium mining. We export quite a lot of uranium to provide fuel for other reactors in other countries. States and territories have radiation and radioactivity regulators. And more recently, we have the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine project, which is going to add to Australia some small modular reactors on the ocean, which are going to also be in ports. These are pressurized water reactors, and I suppose currently around the world there's something like 120 nuclear-powered submarines. But we have this funny process at the moment where legislation prohibits nuclear reactors for electricity, although it does allow for nuclear reactors for research in medicine and allows nuclear reactors on submarines. We look at the cost of nuclear. Of course, it depends on the type and size of reactor. There have been recent builds in USA, Finland, US, and France that have been expensive, and of course, the anti-nuclear advocates keep reminding us of this. But even these countries are planning to actively increase their nuclear energy capacity. They've decided that it doesn't always have to be that expensive. Nuclear builds in the UAE, Korea, and China cost much less. Australia can select a modern design, already built and licensed overseas, and build several at one site, which makes it much more economic. If nuclear is used as a coal replacement, we can benefit from existing transmission lines, cooling water, and skilled workforce. These are all the benefits that we can get. I mean, we're putting nuclear isn't there by itself as a comparison. Really, we're looking at it as part of the electricity system. The transition to net zero and carbon is a challenge. I mean, we've got to do it. There's no doubt about that. But in 2023, 39% of electricity in the NEM was from renewables. Last year in 2024, it was the same. We didn't increase the amount of renewables on the NEM in the last year. Cost of electricity increased. It's a real challenge so we've got to face is putting this extra variable renewables onto the grid. It is difficult. Wholesale prices were negative 23% at the time in the last quarter 4 of 2024. These are all solvable problems that cost money. Adding nuclear energy would reduce the total cost and improve security of supply and reduce emissions. The government objective should be to reduce emissions, not select technology. We shouldn't be saying we just want 100% renewables because that's impossible. Currently, even with the amount of renewables we still have 17% gas. And if we have more renewables, the amount of gas is going to increase. So nuclear is a good option for Australia with the renewables. Thank you. How was that, Joey?
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for that brief but succinct introduction. We're very grateful to you. And now we're going to hear from Darren Durant. Dr. Durant is Associate Professor in Science and Technology Studies at the University of Melbourne. He's published widely on environmental controversies, including climate politics, nuclear power, nuclear waste disposal, and on the relation between experts and citizens in democratic decision-making, including several important contributions to the field. He's the co-author of an important book, Experts and the Will of the People, Society, Populism, and Science. He's currently working on a book on Australian debates about nuclear power and has started a project on failed nuclear waste repository siting efforts in Australia. Darren, it's a pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I thought I'd start with that when we think about, I don't know what just happened. A mini blackout, I think. Sorry about that. When we think about the nuclear question, we tend nowadays to frame it in economic and engineering terms. So I'll start out with some of those economic and engineering terms, but then I want to suggest that that's an extremely narrow framing and doesn't really do justice to some of the larger questions that we should be asking about the nuclear option. So to start with, when we think about the nuclear option as an economic kind of option, the nuclear industry itself on a global stage is a stagnating and dying industry and has been a stagnating and dying industry since the mid-1990s. If you have a look at what has happened with the nuclear industry since the mid-1990s, it's essentially just been treading water. It's sustained its global share of electricity, but has not grown that global share of electricity. So it's a stagnating industry and has been so for almost 30 years. The other thing is then to think about its share of global electricity. We're projected to have right now we have about 30%, of electricity at a global level supplied by renewables. We only have about 9% supplied by nuclear power. That's projected to fall. By 2030, renewables are going to be about 40% of global electricity, and nuclear power would have fallen to about 8%. I think these are relevant to the political question of whether Australia is an outlier in terms of not having nuclear reactors. We're clearly not an outlier. Other things to think about for not being an outlier is that there are almost 200 nations on Earth, and only 32 of them have actual nuclear industry. So we're not an outlier in that particular sense. Not even at the OECD level. There are about 38 OECD nations, and only half of those have nuclear power. There's also only 13 nations currently building nuclear reactors. And the main suppliers on the global stage are China and Russia. So essentially what we actually have at a nuclear supplier and manufacturing level is an industry that is dominated by authoritarian governments, China and Russia, who are also dominating construction. So these things should be taken into account when we're thinking about questions about what kind of outlier are we? Well, if we are an outlier, we're a country that has not decided to go down the same route that authoritarian nations have gone down. So I think that brings a different flavor to this so-called outlier question. Another thing to think about is if we just go back to what happened in 2024, there was 666 gigawatts of renewables capacity added. There were only 4.3 gigawatts. You don't even have to factor in 1/3 capacity factor at that moment to know that renewables are vastly outcompeting nuclear power on a global stage. Then we can go to cost. And I think cost, if we're sticking with economics, Australian electricity market operator, Lazard's, Bloomberg's, they all show that nuclear power is the costliest. It's maybe not costlier than dirty coal, but we don't want dirty coal. It's costlier than renewables. Renewables are the cheapest new build, and they're the cheapest that we could add to our power supply. And then if we have a look at the actual experience of building nuclear reactors over the last 20 years, and a lot of people kind of know this story, but we've only had 5 reactors built in OECD countries in the last 20 odd years. And all of those have been massively over time in construction and also massively over cost. I could give the figures, but it's just massive. So all the estimates that we have of how much we could build a reactor for and how long it would take to build the reactor, our actual experience in OECD nations is very, very poor. Right? So there's a lot of factors here to think about what the global nuclear industry actually is in itself. But now let's say that we want to try and move away from those issues of the economics and the engineering, for instance. Then it becomes questions of fit, and questions of fit are very important. And I'm not convinced at all that nuclear power and renewables are a good fit. We know, for instance, that the coalition's nuclear plan, modeled through frontier economics, it essentially says that nuclear power is going to run at about a 90% capacity factor. And the only way for nuclear power to run at that 90% capacity factor is to switch off rooftop solar. So all those people that have bought rooftop solar will be asked to switch that off, very large amounts of curtailment. So we have to ask what's going to happen with those particular voters as they're asked to switch off their solar power on their roof. It's probably not going to go down well. It's very similar. And I think it's interesting that we have these discussions about policies that affect housing, such as capital gains and so forth. And the question that's often put there is that individual consumers have already made their investment decisions about houses. You can't change the rules later on. But essentially, we're asking rooftop solar people, 4 million of them, 4 million households, to change the rules later on them. I don't think that's going to work very well. So now we start moving into some broader issues. Nuclear and renewables do not make a good fit because in order for nuclear to really feed into the grid at its 90% capacity factor, which is where it makes its money, it doesn't make its money at lower capacity factors. You have to switch off renewables. Okay, I don't think that's going to work. The other thing is Parliament. We all know what the Senate's like. Will any kind of legislation to repeal a nuclear ban ever get through Australia's Senate on a timescale that would allow for lowering emissions? I don't think so. So now we're starting to move into broader issues. And I thought it's interesting that we have a citizens' assembly and that we want to debate broader issues, but do we frame the nuclear option as just a matter of economics and engineering? Actually, no, we don't. So for instance, we know that there are a broader set of problems. The idea of where these reactors would be sited. Places have been announced, but it's a decide, announce, defend approach. That's never worked in the nuclear industry. Part of the reason the nuclear industry became a stagnant industry is because of the decide, announce approach over issues like the siting of reactors and also how nuclear waste management is handled. So we have a replication of those issues here in this idea of here's our 7 sites, we're just going to put them there. Okay, I don't think that's going to work out well either. Weapons proliferation. We have this AUKUS agreement to get nuclear subs. What's going to happen with a nuclear industry? What are those questions about potential weapons proliferation? Haven't been addressed whatsoever. Or, for instance, questions about what is going to happen with the siting of nuclear waste management facilities. We've normally tried to dump them on remote Aboriginal lands. Hasn't worked out. 3 sites, all rejected. So one thing to think about here is that currently the country has had an extremely immature debate about the nuclear option. We focus only on economics and engineering. And I do think that when you focus on economics, nuclear power is a bad deal. And when you focus on engineering, we can't build them. So it's a losing argument there. But I think what's interesting is that we've had those debates without moving into the much larger questions. And those much larger questions about waste, proliferation, siting, parliamentary support, broad public support, all of those larger issues, which nations that have nuclear power have had them, and it has led to the stalling of those domestic industries in those nations. The only ones that are bucking the trend are China or Saudi Arabia, authoritarian nations that don't allow for public discussion about these issues. So I think that as Australia gets into these bigger issues, my question is, why would we be the outlier at that moment? Why would Australia somehow buck the trend that nuclear power has lost its social license to operate in the nations that have it? So I think that that's how I would conclude there, that after we've gone through economics and engineering, we're into these broader social questions. Why would Australia be different from it? I don't think it will be. So I don't think nuclear is a good fit for Australia because of our extensive solar resources, for instance, and our extensive renewables resources. And also we don't really have a political culture that has went through those particular issues. And so I don't see why there should be any high confidence that nuclear power could get off the ground in Australia. I think it's a pipe dream. And I do worry that talk.
Thank you, Darren. We've got to bring to get you to come to a close if you can, please.
Yes, I'm done. Good enough.
Oh, no, I think your message is loud and clear.
All right,
thank you for your presentation. Greatly appreciated. And I'm sure it'll provide much food for thought in some of the conversations we're about to have. I thank both our speakers for giving up their time and doing it at such short notice and doing it with such grace and eloquence. Thank you to both of you. Well, now, I just want to have say a word about the last week's segment, because not everyone who's joined us this evening was able to take part in that earlier set of small group discussions. I would have liked to have been able to share with you a summary of all those conversations, but the Stanford Democratic Lab has not yet made that available to us. It should be with us very soon, and we will certainly communicate it to all of you and others who have registered but have been apologies for this evening. But what I can say is two things. One, which is a little bit disappointing, and that is that there was a heavy concentration, perhaps in part to be expected, of people who had strong views in opposition to nuclear energy, to which, of course, they're perfectly entitled and no doubt have very good reasons for doing so. But we were keen, nevertheless, to have a number of people who had a different view, a more positive view about the option of nuclear power for Australia. We did have a few, but they were in a minority. I should explain that we did make every effort to communicate with as many organizations that have an interest in nuclear energy, but either they were not able to make the event known to their members and supporters, or they weren't able to do so, at least in time. And in any case, that was one of the drawbacks. It would have made for some more robust conversations. In any case, there were rich conversations. People didn't come just to say yeah or nay. They came with some very interesting insights on the whys and wherefores, and on how Australia might proceed in the time ahead, and what some of the obstacles might be on the way, in the way. So there is much more to be thought about and reflected upon these conversations in the coming days, and we'll make sure that we get to all of you an overall summary of those conversations. We have received individual summaries of these groups and their discussions, but I don't think you want to be inflicted with 13 or more summaries. We will give you an overarching summary of the whole. Well, the next thing on our agenda is to have the first of two conversations in small breakout groups of about 10 or 11. And we will have 10 such groups, and we have appointed some facilitators to help the discussion flow as much as possible within the 20 minutes allocated for each of these two conversations. And the first one we want to deal with poses the question: has your position on nuclear power changed much over time? When we break into our small groups, the facilitator, after initial introductions, will ask for a show of hands, those who have changed their position over the years. And each one of those of you will be asked in about 45 seconds, a few sentences, what is it that made you change your position? And then the same question in the opposite direction, show of hands for those who haven't changed their position on the question of nuclear power over the years. And again, in no more than 45 seconds, why is it that you've stuck to your position throughout this time? So that's the first part of that 20-minute conversation. And the second part will be to ask you to think ahead. How do you think this issue, nuclear power and its implications for the wider issues that we've mentioned prior to this and that the speakers have referred to, how do you see this issue panning out after the election in the months and perhaps the next couple of years and beyond? So that's the program for this conversation. And we will now ask you to break up into your small groups, or at least Emily will break us up into our respective groups. And probably with when the time comes, you may get a minute's warning that time is up and time to go on to the next item on our agenda. Good luck with your discussions.
Joe, did you want to join a group?
No.
Hi, Judith. I can see you've just joined. We've just sent everybody into breakout groups now for discussion. So I'll just add you into one of those groups, okay?
Okay, my name's Al Colvin. I come from Terrigal, New South Wales. I'm very involved in agriculture.
Joe, I'm assuming you're in the same room as Rita. I can hear
Yes.
her breakout room. I don't know if you want to mute yourself just for the sake of the recording.
Say that again, please.
I might pause the meeting recording just during this interim period.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, everybody. We've just sent a message out to all breakout groups letting them know they've just got 1 minute to finish up that discussion, and then we'll all be rejoining in here.
Jim? Well, if the coalition doesn't win, which I don't think it will, then it's absolutely, once again, a proposal that's floated, which has happened many times in Australia and some.
Joe, just letting you know the breakout rooms are now all closed and everybody is back in the main meeting. You're just on mute, Joe.
Is everyone back here in the plenary? Okay. All right.
I'm back.
Well, let me then go on to the next item, which is an interesting one. As you all know, as I was saying, nuclear power, of course, has many connections to a whole range of issues. And really, why we're even discussing it, we're discussing it because we have a major set of concerns which is to do with the energy we produce and the energy we consume. So future energy policy is really the underlying big issue that we are dealing with. So we're now going to have a poll. And as you will see, we have a poll which asks you to list what you think are the 3 key priorities in energy policy. And you're given a list of about 7, I think, and you are asked to list what you regard as the 3 highest priorities for Australia as we look ahead to the years ahead. So let's see what comes out of that. All right, well, what we can see is that three issues dominate. One is energy security and reliability, affordable energy, I'm sorry, not affordable energy, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and protection of the environment. So what that tells me is we have a very environmentally conscious group of people with us, which of course is nice to know, but it is interesting that economic growth comes very low down the scale, and well, for community consultation does not appear very high, and I realize the urgency of the other three, but if the community is not behind it, it is difficult to see how any of this will come to pass. So maybe community consultation could have been given a higher ranking, but that's only me speaking. All right, we now want to move on to, but it's interesting. We now want to move on to another poll where the question is, this is very important, how confident are you that Australia's next government, never mind which government, that Australia's next government will pursue energy policies, will deliver not just an energy policy that aligns with your priorities. Are you very confident of that? Moderately confident? You're not sure? Not very confident? Not at all confident? In other words, you've set your priorities. You've just told us what they are. Do you think that Australia's next government will deliver? How confident are you? Let's have a look. Okay, well, that comes out fairly clearly. Very confident, hardly anyone. In fact, 1 out of 104. Not very confident, more than half. And then moderately confident or not sure, and well over a third. So moderately confident or very confident don't get a very high ranking. Between not sure, not very confident, and not at all confident, we have roughly 80% of those present. So you're in for, because you're not very confident, or and at best moderately confident, or you just don't know, you're in for a difficult time ahead. You're not going to be throwing too many parties celebrating the government's energy policies. That's what that tells us. Okay. Well, now if we keep moving on, because we've got a lot still to get through, it follows from the previous question we've just set. If the policy of the next government on the range of energy-related issues doesn't align with your priorities, and that's a clear majority, are you likely to join with others in a concerted effort to get the policy direction your favor? In other words, apart from bemoaning the fact that things aren't going the way you would wish, are you prepared to make some effort to get them changed? So that's the question. And you're being asked whether you would, yes, no, I wouldn't, or I'm not sure. Let's see how you go on that. And then, assuming it's a yes, are you strongly inclined to do something, moderately inclined, not sure, not at all inclined? Let's see what happens. Okay, well, I think the story is pretty clear. The vast majority of those present are willing to do something, are willing to try and push in one way or another in order to get a better outcome on the energy policies that you would favor. With a much smaller number not sure whether they would or they wouldn't, and a very small number saying that they would not be of a mind to do very much. All right. Now, it's time, I think, for us to enter into another conversation. And that is focused squarely on the democratic question, which, after all, is the underlying driver for this exercise. Can decisions about Australia's energy future be made more democratically more democratically than they are now, democratically full stop? And you posed two questions which really are linked very closely. One, can we leave it to the 3 yearly elections and the judgment of those who happen to be in government at any given time, and those around them, minders, advisors, etc., to reach the decisions? Is that the most democratic way available to us? Or are there other ways in which we could foster democratic deliberation and decision-making around these issues we're discussing this evening? And if there are other ways, would you care to share with the rest of your group what these other ways might look like? So we are back now to our breakout groups with this question: what is the best way forward for more effective democratic decision-making? We have one last task, collective task, before I say a few words about where to from here. And this is another poll. If I can take you very briefly through it. The poll asks a simple question: are you supportive of this kind of project, the Citizen Assembly project, which it is our intention to scale up, and not only just in numbers, but in terms of the issues to be covered, to be discussed, to be thought through. Of course, important issues that go to the future of this country and its place in the world. So, very supportive, moderately, supportive or moderately, not at all or not sure. Just give us your impression at this point. It may change of time, of course.
Joe, while we were waiting, there are some questions that came in right in the beginning that weren't answered. And are you also going to do the 1 or 2 key points from all the breakout groups?
Now, we won't have time, unfortunately, for the key points, but we will try and get from the facilitators some key points which we can then send around to people.
Thank you.
Try and do that. Okay, well, I think we've just about most people have responded, and clearly there is anything from very strong support to moderate support, a very strong majority, and that's very pleasing. Now, there is a second part to this question. Have you got it there?
Yes, Joe. They've addressed all elements of the question.
You just scroll down a bit, Joe, and the whole
Yes, but
thing's
just a minute. I've lost it. Just a second. The second part of the question, have people answered that question?
Yes, Joe. All 3 elements of the question, if they're willing to discuss this with their networks.
Yeah, I don't have it on my screen. I must have accidentally. You can tell us what it says about the other 2 elements of the question.
Absolutely. And I think Eddie's just sharing his screen now as well, but sharing on everybody else's screens, they will also be able to see that the general consensus was that 96% of people thought that this was something that they would share with others in their network, and 4% thought no. And then in terms of moving forward, in terms of generating interest and participation and issues, by far the most popular way to engage is webinars at 88%, closely followed by in-person forums at 64%, and least of all would be podcasts and social media conversations. So a lot more focus on kind of more collaborative, in-person and engaging discussions.
Okay, that's very interesting. It might, of course, be a comment on the age demographic. Maybe if we had a lot of people in their teens and 20s, we might get a slightly different ranking of possibilities, but we can't second guess that. All right. Well, now, this leads me to a few comments I'd like to share with you. As you can imagine, a number of us have done an awful lot of thinking about how to deal with the emerging situation we have. I wrote a piece on an online publication called Pearls and Irritations over a week ago, which describes the crisis that we're currently facing, which is not peculiar to Australia. And that is, but by and large, democracy is broken. And it is broken to the extent, this is my view, not conversation at the Crossroads, it's broken to the extent that it calls into question whether countries like the United States or Germany or Australia or New Zealand can really deserve to be called democratic any longer, assuming that it was a not unreasonable description some decades ago. So many factors at work. You may or may not know, for example, just a very simple little thing, that it's not one value, one vote. The Nationals in this country, small party, with a relatively small number of votes, is able to secure 10 seats. The Greens, with twice or three times that vote, are able to secure only 4 seats. So there's a great disparity because of the preferential system and many other factors at work in the electoral process, which skew results one way or another. And there's another thing worth mentioning. At the end of World War II, the first election in 1946, the two major parties secured 93% of the national vote between them. And 3 years later, they secured 96% of the national vote. This year's election, if we're lucky, if they're lucky, the two major parties will secure at best 65 or 65.5% of the vote. Watch out for the election results. And the winning party, which may be the Labour Party, will probably barely secure 30% of the national vote. So these are just the, if you like, the oddities of the electoral system as it has unfolded, particularly in recent years. And it points to the disillusionment of a wide cross-section of society with political parties, politicians, the way the parliament conducts itself, and many other institutions. So the question is whether we can breathe new life into democracy, particularly in the country that is of concern to us, the place we call Australia. Now, many of us are very strongly drawn to the idea of going back to the origins of the democratic idea, at least in the Western tradition, which takes us back to Athenian democracy. And Athenian democracy paid very little regard to elections and representation because it believed in presentation. Everyone citizens presents themselves. Of course, at the time, there were only 50,000 or so Athenian citizens. And they would have a monthly meeting, sometimes more often. And at the height, 7,000 or 8,000 would gather in the agora. They would make the decisions. Over the course of a year, 80% of the 50,000 citizens would have attended at least one, and in most cases, at least 3 of these meetings. It was presentational. You are there. Yes, you elect some people to perform certain tasks, but those people you elect are at your beck and call. You don't like them, you remove them. And they know they can be removed at any time if they don't perform. They don't make the big decisions. They implement tasks given to them by the assembly. Now, of course, we don't live in Athenian democracy in Athens. We have huge numbers by comparison and huge distances in the case of Australia in particular. So we've been obviously thinking of ways in which we can bring technology, tools, to try and bring people together in different ways. There is no simple solution to the problem of democracy. No simple step, no single step. There is no point bringing people together where the principal task is to moan and groan about all the things that are wrong. And you can be doing that for eternity. There is so much that's wrong. The issues the decisions we make on so many issues, the way we arrive at them, the way they're implemented, etc., etc., etc. You can moan and groan, but that won't take you very far. Yes, you can do a review of where we're at, but you've got to go beyond that. On the other hand, it's no point constructing the perfect utopia of the future and spending oodles of time thinking through what the utopia would look like. A little bit of time, perhaps. The important thing is concrete steps along the way to a more desirable democratic future. So that, I think, is the agenda, if you like, before us. And for that, we need to try many, many options. So at the moment, and we want to be doing this in consultation with lots and lots of people, including all those who are participating in this particular initiative, we want to be able to identify the issues that are of particular concern, which are contentious, which are controversial, which people might have very different ideas about, both about the objective, but also differences of view about how to achieve the objective. And to see what that kind of conversation might result in. And we're going to explore what some more advanced technologies can enable us to do, provided they can do it in a way that is respectful of the human person, that pays attention to the needs, the aspirations, the capacities, the intelligence of the human person. So that's what we want to explore. We've used for this first small, humble attempt the services of the Stanford Democracy Lab. We might continue to do so. They're aware of the limitations of what they have to offer, but we don't want to scale it up. And ideally, we'd be thinking of a follow-up, which perhaps might bring many, many hundreds, perhaps 1,000 people together. It's still a very small step. On other issues, not nuclear necessarily, not at all nuclear issue, we've done that for the moment. And as some people have said, I've heard them say, that may not be a very lively issue post-election, but there'll be plenty of others, both what we call issues on the home front and on the global front and on the regional front. So yes, we'll try and do that. and we'll consult widely with both individuals, with groups and organizations as to in what way, how to do it, the timing, etc., etc. But we don't want to lose sight of the need to also do things in person. And there are many possibilities in the neighborhood, locally, in the workplace, in many of the places where people communicate and assemble. So we should explore that. And the agora, the Athenian agora, should not be considered completely out of reach. Australia, for example, has some of the world's largest stadiums. If the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, or the large Sydney stadiums, or in Adelaide and Brisbane and Perth, can accommodate all of them, 50,000 plus, in some cases, the MCG over 100,000, theoretically, it should be able to be used not just for sport and concerts, but for conversation. And we should aspire to that possibility at a given moment. We should not forget that in days and years gone by, we were able to assemble in Australia, haven't done it for a while now, but we were able to assemble hundreds of thousands of people in protests on one issue or another. In this case, it wouldn't be so much protest, but engagement in deliberating and reaching decisions on important, crucial questions. And we should also explore the hybrid possibility. In other words, you could have a large in-person event plus a significant online event happening at the same time, and with appropriate technology able to streamline the communication between both parts. These are just ideas for the future, but there is no harm in being ambitious, provided it can be done in concrete and manageable steps along the way. And the final thing I'd want to say is, of course, we are struggling not only with institutions and structures and interests that are unresponsive, we are struggling with mindsets. The mindsets of the Australian community, taken as a whole, the bulk of it is not very open to these ideas at this point in time. And as I heard someone say, there's a great deal that needs to be done on the educational front. And that's something we will need to explore very seriously, both formal education from kinder to university, and how these issues and these concerns and the democratic ethic can be more effectively inculcated in the thinking and practice of an emerging new generation. Yes, that's part. And in lifelong civic education, not just about processes, but about issues and how the issues can be handled in practice. Over a few months or a year, not much will be achieved, but over 1 decade or 2 decades, who knows? There may be a great deal that can be achieved. At least that's the hope and the aspiration. So all I'm trying to say is we're very keen to develop these ideas together with others, other groups, as many people in the community as possible, explore possibilities and keep trying things both in the latter part of this year and in the time ahead. And we'd like to think we'll be able to do it with your engagement, enthusiasm, your energy and your contact. So let me conclude by thanking you all for participating. We will be sending a recording of some of the key aspects of this evening's event, not the group conversations, of course. And we will also send you some more material and keep you in touch and perhaps have a more systematic survey of issues to be considered and possibilities for further initiatives further down the track. So all I can say is keep well and stay tuned, alert, and in active conversation with each other and all those that you are in touch with. Good luck And thank you again for your participation and your interest.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And thank you, Emily, for
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
technical work
Thanks.
behind the scenes.
Thanks,
Joe.
Joe.
You, everyone.
Thanks,
everyone.
And to the facilitators and everybody.
Thank you.
Any-
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Goodbye. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.